Right now, as the floodwaters pull back across Indiana, they are uncovering a landscape that was destroyed beneath them. Collapsed bridges, roads that simply aren't there anymore, homes gutted from the inside, and, in at least one case, a hole in the earth deep enough to swallow a person. After 6 days of storms, the rain has finally eased, and the White River, which crested at levels not seen in over a century, has begun to recede. But the retreat of the water is not the end of this disaster. It's the moment Indiana can finally see the full size of it. And the picture emerging is worse than the flood looked at its peak. At least 7 people dead, hundreds of homes damaged, and roads and bridges across the state collapsed or washed away. At least 7 people are now confirmed dead. The damage runs into the hundreds of homes and across dozens of roads and bridges, and some of what the water revealed is going to take not days, but months and years to rebuild. This is what the flood left behind, and why the aftermath of a disaster like this can be as dangerous as the disaster itself. If you want the full sourced picture of this recovery as it unfolds, subscribe. It's how this coverage reaches the people living it. Here's what we know. To understand the aftermath, you have to understand the strange, deceptive relief of the moment the flood peaks. By Sunday, the worst was visibly passing. The rain that had trained over Indiana for 6 straight days finally began to break up. In Indianapolis, the White River crested and started its slow retreat back toward its banks. Emergency managers who had spent a week in crisis mode allowed themselves the first cautious exhale. Officials in Hamilton County, just north of the city, expressed genuine relief that conditions were improving and the water was dropping. But every one of them attached the same warning to that relief. Recovery is going to take time, and the danger is not gone. Because a flood doesn't clean up after itself when it leaves. It pulls back to reveal everything it broke while it was there, and it leaves behind hazards that weren't visible and in some cases didn't exist before the water came. The retreat of the flood is not the end of the story. In many ways, it's the beginning of the hardest chapter, the reckoning with what was lost, and the slow, dangerous work of discovering it piece by piece. And the first thing Indiana discovered is that the ground itself could no longer be trusted. Here is the detail from this aftermath that should stop everyone cold, because it captures how the danger outlives the flood. In Henry County, floodwater had torn away part of a road, undermining it from below, hollowing out the earth beneath the pavement until what looked like a solid surface was a thin crust over a void. A barricade had been placed to keep people away from it, but early Sunday, a 31-year-old cyclist went around that barricade and fell into the collapsed road, into a sinkhole that had opened where the water washed the ground out from under it. He was found dead. The county coroner confirmed the man appears to have gone around the barrier and fallen into the failed roadway. Think about what that means. The flood didn't kill him while it was raging. It killed him after it receded, by leaving behind a trap that hadn't been there a week earlier, a hole in a road that looked passable. This is the hidden lethality of a flood's aftermath. Moving water scours out the soil beneath roads, bridges, and foundations, leaving them structurally hollow. A road can look completely intact on the surface, while the ground that supported it is simply gone. Drive over it, walk over it, ride over it, and it collapses. It's why those barricades are not suggestions, and why the water went down, so it must be safe now, is one of the most dangerous assumptions a person can make after a flood. The surface lies. And across Indiana this week, the surface is lying in 1,000 places at once. That single sinkhole is one piece of a much larger picture of infrastructure damage now emerging across the state. In Carmel, just north of Indianapolis, the Hazel Dell Parkway Bridge near 106th Street collapsed under the force of the floodwaters. Engineers are now assessing whether it can be repaired at all, or whether it will have to be completely torn out and rebuilt from scratch. A project that would take not weeks but many months, cutting a major route for the community that depends on it. Earlier in the week, the flooding buckled a section of Interstate 70, an interstate highway physically deformed by the water. Historic U.S. Route 40, the old national road, was closed by flooding. A portion of State Road 38 in Wayne County was simply washed away, gone entirely, with crews blocking both ends of a road that no longer connects to anything. Riley Road in Newcastle collapsed into a water-filled cavity. Each of these is its own small revelation, uncovered as the water dropped. A bridge that can't be trusted, an interstate that has to be repaired, a state road that has to be rebuilt from the dirt up. And behind every one of them is a community that now has to route around it. School buses, ambulances, commuters, deliveries, all forced onto longer, harder paths for months while the repairs are made. This is the part of a flood that doesn't make the dramatic footage, but reshapes daily life long after the water is gone. The slow, expensive, grinding work of rebuilding the bones of a region. And the true scale of it is only now becoming clear, because you cannot assess a bridge that's underwater. All week, the floodwater hid the damage it was doing, scouring foundations, undermining supports, eroding roadbeds, where no engineer could see or reach it. Only as the water drops can crews finally get in to inspect what's left, and what they're finding, structure by structure, is that the damage is more extensive than the visible flooding suggested. A bridge that stood through the crest may still be condemned once inspectors see what the current did to its footings below the waterline. Every day of receding water brings another round of assessments, another set of closures, another estimate revised upward. The damage total for this disaster isn't a number that was set when the rain stopped. It's a number still climbing as the water reveals more of what it broke. And as difficult as the infrastructure is to face, it's not the hardest thing the water uncovered. The hardest revelations are the personal ones, the homes and the people standing in front of them. Frank Gounder, a furniture maker who lives on Indianapolis's hard-hit north side, less than a mile from the White River, spent the flood watching the water creep up his driveway until it stood 2 feet deep inside his home and his workshop. Sunday, which happened to be his 37th birthday, he was picking through waterlogged materials and half-finished handmade furniture, trying to see what, if anything, could be salvaged. That's what the receding water revealed for him, a life's craft, soaked and ruined, to be sorted piece by piece into what might be saved and what has to be thrown away. Multiply that scene across hundreds of homes. Across Indiana, the retreating water is uncovering house after house gutted from the inside, drywall to be torn out, floors buckled, appliances destroyed, family belongings turned to debris, and the invisible, insidious threat of mold that will begin growing in every soaked wall within days. For the people returning to these homes, the flood's end is when the grief actually begins, because it's the moment they can finally walk inside and see everything they lost. And 7 families are grieving something that can't be rebuilt. The confirmed dead now number at least 7 across the state. The 31-year-old cyclist in the Henry County sinkhole, a 4-year-old boy in Jennings County, killed when a tree crashed through his bedroom during the derecho's winds, a 58-year-old woman in Delaware County who drove into floodwater, a 19-year-old man, 2 women in Lake and Porter counties, and a man in LaPorte County. Each one a person who woke up a week ago with an ordinary life ahead of them. What's striking and heartbreaking about that list is how it spans the entire arc of the disaster. The 4-year-old was killed on the very first day by the derecho's wind before the flooding had even begun. The cyclist died on one of the last days, in the aftermath, by a road that failed after the water receded. Between them, the storm found people in cars, in bedrooms, on bikes, across 7 different counties, over the better part of a week. A disaster like this doesn't kill all at once, in a single dramatic moment. It takes lives at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end, which is exactly why officials keep pleading with people not to relax the moment the sun comes back out. The danger, as this week proved, is present from the first gust to long after the last raindrop. Now, here's why the water went down does not mean it's over, because 2 real dangers outlasted the flood, and one of them is still moving. The first is contamination. As the water recedes, it leaves behind what it picked up. In Delaware County, emergency management warned that the floodwater had mixed with sewage, gasoline, and other hazardous chemicals, a toxic slurry that coats everything it touched and can release dangerous gases as it sits. The brown line the water leaves on the walls isn't just dirt, it's contamination. Every home, every street, every field the flood reached is now a cleanup hazard, Dangerous to touch without protection, dangerous for children to play in, dangerous to wade through. The water leaving doesn't remove that threat. It just leaves it behind, stuck to everything. The second is the one still in motion, the downstream flood. River flooding travels. All that record water that crested in Anderson, Noblesville, and Indianapolis doesn't vanish. It drains south and west through the river network, meaning communities along the Wabash River and the East Fork of the White River are still facing their own crests in the days ahead, some with flood warnings running well into the following week. For the north and center of the state, this is now recovery, but for parts of western and southern Indiana, the wave is still coming. Their disaster hasn't peaked yet. So even as one end of the state begins to dry out and dig out, the other end is still bracing for the water to arrive. Step back and take in the full scope of what Indiana just endured, because the numbers are historic. It began on Tuesday, August 11th, with a derecho, a violent, fast-moving windstorm that tore across northern Indiana with winds of 90 to 100 miles per hour, stretching at least 250 miles long and 60 miles wide, downing trees and power lines and knocking out electricity to hundreds of thousands. Then a weather front stalled over the state and refused to move, and thunderstorm complexes trained over the same ground for 6 straight days, feeding on tropical moisture pulled up from the Gulf. Parts of the state saw a 1 in 1,000 year rainfall, over 11 inches in little more than a day. The rivers responded by shattering records that had stood for generations. In Anderson, the White River peaked at 24.9 feet, obliterating a record set in 1913. In Noblesville, 24.5 feet, breaking another 1913 mark. Marks that had defined Indiana's flood history for 113 years were erased in a single weekend. At the peak, more than 300,000 homes and businesses lost power. By Sunday, that was down to around 130,000, still an enormous number. Governor Mike Braun declared a statewide disaster emergency and mobilized the National Guard, and President Trump approved a federal emergency declaration, unlocking federal money for rescue and shelter. Over one 8-hour stretch Saturday night, Indianapolis crews alone performed 56 water rescues, pulling 100 people and 48 pets from the water. Those are the numbers that made this one of the most significant inland flooding disasters in Indiana's recorded history. And now the state has to live in the aftermath of them. Step outside Indiana for a moment, because the aftermath holds a lesson for anyone, anywhere. The most dangerous assumption people make about floods is that the danger ends when the water leaves. It doesn't. The aftermath has its own distinct set of hazards, and they kill people who survived the flood itself. The washed-out roads and hidden sinkholes that swallow cars and cyclists, the contaminated water and mold that poison homes, the weakened bridges that collapse under normal weight, the downed power lines hidden in receding water. Statistically, some of the most preventable deaths in a flood event happen during cleanup and return, not during the flood's peak, because that's when people let their guard down. So if you're ever on the returning side of a flood, take the aftermath as seriously as the storm. Never go around a barricade. It is there because someone determined the ground beyond it cannot be trusted, and the man in Henry County died proving that point. Don't drive on roads that were underwater until authorities confirm they're sound. Assume any floodwater residue is contaminated. Photograph everything before you clean for insurance, and understand that standard homeowners policies don't cover flood damage, a hard truth thousands of Indiana families are confronting right now. The water going down is not the all clear. It's the start of a different, quieter, and still dangerous phase. Here's where things stand as Indiana begins to dig out. At least 7 people are dead. The White River shattered 113-year-old records at Anderson and Noblesville before beginning to recede. The Hazel Dell Parkway Bridge has collapsed. A section of Interstate 70 buckled, and roads across the state have been washed away or undermined, including the Henry County Road where a sinkhole took a man's life. Hundreds of homes are damaged or destroyed. Around 130,000 customers remain without power. A federal emergency declaration is in effect. And even as the north and center of the state turn to recovery, communities downstream along the Wabash and East Fork White Rivers are still waiting for their crests. If you're in the affected region, the recovery guidance matters as much now as the evacuation guidance did a week ago. Do not go around barricades or drive on roads that were flooded until they're cleared. The ground underneath may be gone. Treat all floodwater and residue as contaminated. Wear protection during cleanup and keep children away from it. Watch for downed power lines. Document your damage before you touch it, and contact FEMA and your county emergency management about the federal assistance now available. And check on your neighbors, especially the elderly and anyone rebuilding alone, because the aftermath of a flood is long, exhausting, and isolating in a way the flood itself never is. Indiana survived the water. Now it has to survive what the water left behind: the months of rebuilding, the ruined homes, the broken roads, and the 7 empty chairs at 7 tables. Spare a thought tonight for the family in Henry County who lost someone to a road that gave way after the danger was supposed to have passed, and for the furniture maker sorting through the wreckage of his craft on the morning of his birthday, trying to find something worth saving.